And we are back.
It's us once again, the Horror Guys.
Episode 108.
I am Kevin.
I'm Brian.
And we're here to talk about some horror movies.
Yep.
And a short.
4 horror movies and a short, like usual.
Yeah.
Got some different things coming up in the next few weeks, but this time we'll stick to the 4 and 1. And what do we got this time? A couple of silent films.
Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Yeah.
From 1920.
101 years old.
And another oldie, not quite as old, Vampyr from 1932.
I like the way you say vampire and not vampire.
That's right.
Yes.
Because it's spelled with a Y.
Yeah. 2 silent films, Caligari and Vampyr.
And then Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the movie.
Not silent.
No, that was in 1992, before the TV series. And we got one, The Beast Must Die, from 1974.
Oh!
Which was kind of a different kind of horror movie.
Yeah, more of a whodunit.
More so.
And we've got a short film, Chromophobia, which is kind of a fun one, too.
Fear of colors.
All right, and as usual, this podcast is brought to you by the Horror Guys Guide series. We've got the Horror Guys Guide to Universal Studios Shock Theater, Horror Guys Guide to Universal Studios Son of Shock, and the Horror Guys Guide to Hammer Horror Films. And, of course, Tales to Make You Shiver, Volume 1 and Volume 2.
We are our own sponsor.
Go to horrorguys.com/books and follow the links to wherever you like to buy your books. So, what's up first?
Well, let's go the oldest first. Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Can't think of too many things older than this one.
Hypnotism is bad. Hypnotism is scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Black and white sideways buildings is in Germany are scary too.
Yep.
Directed by Robert Weenie? Don't know. Written by Carl Meyer and Hans Janowitz. Stars Werner Krause, Conrad Veidt, and Friedrich Fehr. Hour 7 minutes. Link in the show notes to watch it for free. You don't need to pay for this anywhere. And, again, it is silent and depending on the version you watch, it might be black and white. It might be tinted. It's hard to say.
They added some tint later. Yeah.
They did. I don't know if that was a thing that came up later, if they did it at the time.
It's hard to tell.
It was really no big effort to put like a colored filter in front of the camera, in front of the projector. So they may have done that at the time. All right. Well, you've seen this. What did you think?
It was all right.
How does it hold up in 101 years later?
Entertainment-wise, I don't think it was much, but it's an important movie, and it was groundbreaking. I mean, watching some of the stuff they're doing, and it was, to think that, that was new. This was stunning to audiences back then.
Yeah, you watch those old Abbott and Costello films and Laurel and Hardy, and they invented a bunch of things, but you know what? Films had been around for 40 years with those guys. This film had been invented like Tuesday.
And they were still, inventing all kinds of things, all kinds of techniques, doing stuff for the first time, special effects. So interesting in that regard, but as far as entertainment,
it's kind of on the boring side.
A little bit, yeah.
But it's not unwatchable. It's not the worst thing I've seen this month.
No.
All right. Well, we start out in a garden, or what looks like a garden, and 2 men sit and talk. The older guy explains, "Spirits surround us on every side. They've driven me from hearth and home, from wife and child." As they talk, a strange, silent woman walks by. The younger man, Francis, explains that she's Jane, his betrothed. He explains that his story is even more remarkable than the older man's, and now he's going to tell the story. Back in Hostenwall, where he was born, a traveling fair had arrived. And we move into a flashback. We then see Francis's friend Alan. We then see Dr. Caligari with his big round glasses and top hat. Caligari goes to see the town clerk for a permit for his show.
He's got a cabinet, too.
He does. The clerk, a man of power, is sitting way up high on a pedestal, making little Caligari grovel beneath him. Caligari explains that he has a somnambulist act and gets his permit. I like to do my somnambulist act at least once a day.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I do it for like 8 hours.
In a stretch,
my somnambulism
sometimes,
isn't as good as it should be. Okay, so we cut to many shots of the fair and finally see Caligari start his act. He presents Cesar the Somnambulist. That night, the first of a strange series of murders are committed, and the first victim was the town clerk.
Uh-oh.
Don't mess with Caligari.
That's right.
Francis and Alan are in the crowd watching the act. Caligari opens his cabinet. There's the cabinet.
Uh-huh.
And Cesar is inside, looking dead. Or maybe just very asleep.
Very, very hypnotized.
Yeah. Caligari wakes him up. Cesar seems to be sleepwalking and following Caligari's commands in his sleep. Cesar is said to look into the future, and Alan wants to know how long he'll live. Never ask a fortune teller that. They knew that 100 years ago, because they might answer you.
The answer is never good in these movies.
What answer could they give you that would be good?
Uh-huh.
Are you 50 years in the future? Is that good? Well, why not 70? Why not 100?
Yeah.
What if they told you 1,000 years in the future?
It'd be hard to believe.
You wouldn't believe that either.
Yeah.
And if they told you, 4 o'clock? Oh. Oops.
Yeah.
Well, Caesar stares at him and says, "Your time is short. You'll die at dawn." Which is not the answer Alan wanted to hear.
Not no 50 years.
No, 5 o'clock. On the way home, the two men talk about Jane. They both want her. That night, Alan is murdered, but we don't see who did it. Francis remembers the prophecy of the somnambulist and goes to the police to report the crime. They start looking into the somnambulist. How many times in this review can I say somnambulist?
And you say it so well every time.
Somnambulist. Who practices somnambulism. Don't be an insomniac. Wow. Meanwhile, the police catch a killer, but it's not Caesar. We see Caligari feeding Caesar, and he literally keeps him in that cabinet all day long. The man in the box. The police come to question them both, but the newspaper announces the killer has been caught, letting the two villains off the hook. The killer in custody explains that he's a copycat and had nothing to do with the first two murders. Jane goes to see Caligari. She sees Caesar, freaks out, and runs away. That night he visits her as she sleeps. She wakes up and they fight. He carries her off through the surreal landscape. The men catch up to him, so he abandons Jane to make his escape. When she wakes up, she cries out, "Caesar!" But Francis has been watching Caligari and Caesar for hours.
You don't actually hear her say it like that, though.
You don't hear her say it like anything.
But it does look like that.
How do you know she doesn't sound like me?
Well, that's the thing. We don't know. It's silent.
But they've been watching him for hours. How could he have been involved? The police see what's up and find a dummy in the cabinet. It's not the real Caesar. Caligari runs off. Francis goes to the insane asylum to see if they're missing any inmates, and they take him to the doctor who runs the facility. It's Caligari. What?
What?
Somnambulism has always been his special field of study, and they read about a man named Caligari and his somnambulist Caesar who wandered Europe in the year 1083. When a somnambulist was admitted to the asylum, Caligari took advantage of the situation to test his theories. Oh, the evil asylum keeper.
It was him the whole time.
They find Caesar dead in a ravine, and they carry him back to the asylum to confront Caligari. Caligari then attacks the other doctors, so they put him in a straitjacket. Oh, but then we cut back to modern times, where Francis tells his friend the whole story. And we see that they're visiting Jane, who is now a mental patient in the asylum. Caesar is also there, apparently not really dead at all. And, of course, they see Caligari as well, and Francis attacks him, and they slip the straitjacket on him. Oh, he was crazy all along.
Everybody's insane.
The only sane one is Caligari.
Oh, okay.
Naturally, in the end, we get a surprise. It turns out Francis was insane all along, making up a story about the man in charge of the hospital. Caligari thinks he knows how to cure Francis, the deluded madman, right now. He's figured it all out. All right, so I watched the restored 4K version with tinting and very creative-looking title cards, and it looked awesome. It's available on Amazon Prime, But there's a free version available there as well, in plain old black and white, that's complete but doesn't look nearly as sharp. So you can pay for the pretty version or you can watch the cheap version yourself. The visuals in this film are what made it special at the time. Everything is bent, twisted, off-kilter, and cartoony. There's not a straight vertical wall in the film. Things like beams of light are just painted on the walls and floor, while trees and plants are mostly just backdrops and set pieces as well. Not quite like a stage play, but kinda sorta.
A lot of similarities, yeah.
It's not clear what Caligari hoped to achieve other than proving he could do it. The acting here is really over-the-top, pantomime, and hammy, as is often the case in silent films. Really, the best thing about this film is the set design and surreal landscape. Yeah.
Yeah.
I liked it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you dressed up like
it's worth checking out.
either Caligari or Cesar and went to a Halloween party today, people be asking, what are you supposed to be?
Mm.
But yeah, it's very cool. And again, it's one of the earliest silent films.
Mm-hmm.
A more modern, I say more modern in a very relative way, 1932, Vampyr, Vampyr, Vampyr silent film, directed by Carl Theodor Dreyer, written by Sharon LeFanu and Kristen Jewell, stars Julian West, Maurice Schutz, and Rena Mandel, hour and 15 minutes. All right, well, you have seen this one.
I have a couple times.
What'd you think?
It was pretty good. Yeah.
It's all right.
Yeah, pretty entertaining for its age, and yeah, it was watchable.
The vampire is surprisingly not that present here.
No.
You don't see him very much.
More of a suspense.
It's a very moody visual kind of thing.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of story going on here. Not a lot of characters that you care about. But it looks cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not in the same way as Caligari, but it looks neat. Well, Alan Gray stops in at a hotel, but it's closed. Someone finally lets him in, and he sees a strange man with a scythe outside. Like death.
Ew.
He hears an odd chanting going on outside his room and follows the sounds. Well, there's a strange, twisted-looking man upstairs, so Alan goes back to his room. It's a creepy place, and Alan is more than a little freaked out. He goes to bed. In the middle of the night, an older man comes into Alan's room and approaches the bed. That hasn't happened to me since the last time I went to the Holiday Inn. Alan is awake and watches this happen. "She must not die," insists the man.
Okay.
He takes out a package and writes on it, "To be opened upon my death." And he sets down the package and leaves the room. Yep, Holiday Inn.
Yeah, perfect.
Alan gets out of bed and wonders what malevolent situation he's gotten himself into. He sees a reflection in the water, but there's no one there, like a ghost. Mm-hmm. He sees the shadow of a man shoveling backwards. The dirt just leaps right into his shovel. He sees shadows of soldiers who aren't really there. Then the shadow walks up and meets with a real man who had no shadow until this one showed up.
So, trippy visuals.
A lot of camera tricks there, yeah.
Yeah. New stuff, again. Even in 1932, there were still new things.
What
new
can you
effects
do with these newfangled cameras?
Yeah.
Alan wanders around the building and finds an old castle full of creepy rooms with skulls and old books. The town doctor, an old Mark Twain look-alike, comes down the stairs and asks if Alan can hear that. Alan replies that he can hear the child and the dogs. The doctor explains that, hey, there's no children or dogs here.
Just their sounds.
The doctor takes an old man into his office, and we see that he has a bottle of poison on the shelf. Skull and crossbones stuff. Mm-hmm. Literally.
Classic.
Alan walks on and comes to a large manor house where he spots the old man who was in his room earlier. He checks in on a girl and comments that her wounds have almost healed. The girl cries out, "The blood! The blood!" Probably sounded just like that,
Probably like Tattoo saying, "The plane, the plane."
The blood, the blood,
the blood.
Alan peeps through the window and watches as someone shoots the old man in the back. Everyone in the household gathers around to watch the old man die. The servants ask Alan to stay with them for the night. Alan remembers the package the old man gave him earlier and pulls it out of his coat pocket. It's a book called The Strange History of Vampyrs. It explains what vampires are and why they do the things they do. It explains that the ghosts are in their service and the living can fall under their sway as well. There is a story about a village doctor that became a vampire's henchman. The daughter of the house, Giselle, sees Leone outside, and they run to her, but then they find an old woman crouched over her who runs away as they approach. They don't see the old woman. Leone has been bitten by a vampire.
And because he's read the book, he knows all about him now.
He does. He recognizes it. Good thing he had that book.
Yes, handy guidebook.
And there's a lot of stuff in this book that tells the details of vampires because I guess they figured nobody had seen Dracula in the past 12 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, their vampires were not quite as well known then as they are now, so maybe it was necessary.
I think it was. Yeah.
But this, again, is like 10 or 11 years after Bela Lugosi's Dracula, so maybe silent, but it's not the
household
first
name like they are now.
Yeah. Well, the town doctor arrives, who we've seen before, with the old woman who is probably the vampire. Could this be the same doctor/henchman who was mentioned in the book? He examines Leone, and she's not doing well. She needs a transfusion, the doctor explains, and Alan volunteers to give his blood. Alan passes out after the transfusion, and the old servant reads his vampire book while he waits. Alan dreams of a skeletal hand offering poison. The old servant then wakes him up, and they go in to find Leona about to drink the real poison. The doctor runs off with Alan in pursuit. Alan, still weak from the transfusion, has a hallucination, or maybe an out-of-body experience. In this state, he finds a coffin with himself inside. He also sees Giselle locked up and tied to the bed by the doctor. Alan's coffin is then carried out to the graveyard, near where the real Alan is asleep. He wakes up and the vision fades. He awakens to find the old servant nearby who has finished reading the book. The old man is now digging up an old grave. He thinks he knows who the vampire is. The body inside the grave is perfectly preserved, and yep, it's the old woman we saw a couple of times before.
We knew it. We knew she was the one.
I didn't know it initially. I mean, who's this old woman? Actually, I thought it was an old man. Got the shortish long hair, sort of like the original Doctor Who. His hair is a little bit longer.
Yeah.
I thought it was a man. No, it was an old woman. Well, they stake her to the ground with a bar of iron, and she instantly turns into a skeleton. Meanwhile, weird things start happening to the old doctor who runs for his life. His master has been destroyed, so who knows what's going to catch up to him. Alan releases Giselle from her prison, and they run across the fields to get away. The doctor then hides in a mill and gets locked in. The old servant finds him there and turns on the machines, burying the doctor in several tons of flour. And I had seen this before a couple years ago, and I think that's the only scene I really remembered.
The ending, yeah. They really used like tons of flour for that scene.
Certainly did. I bet that guy had to cough for years afterwards.
Yeah.
Alan and Giselle then get home safely, and the doctor suffocates under the flour. Happy ending for everybody but the doctor.
Oops.
What the shadow play? There's some shadow things here. It's a nice effect to show ghosts, but keep in mind that this was released the year after Universal's Frankenstein and Dracula. Oh yeah, I was thinking 1920. No, this was just the following year after Dracula, 1 year later, and Frankenstein also. And the talking movies were getting much more common at this point. So, if you just saw a bunch of movies last year where they talked and then this thing comes out, kind of like going back.
This is going to seem, a step backwards.
Retro. Well, we don't see too much of the actual vampire here. The main villain that we see is the Doctor, but I couldn't not see Mark Twain anytime he was on screen.
Yeah, very much so.
Maybe that was a common look for old men in that age, because, Mark Twain he died not too long before this film was made, so, it was a common look, I guess.
Yeah, tribute.
But it made him look decidedly not intimidating. Who's afraid of Mark Twain? As far as celebrity resemblances go, Alan looks just like every photo I've ever seen of H.P. Lovecraft. Why the long face? Maybe this is secretly Lovecraft's own true origin story. I don't know how well-known vampire mythology was when this came out, although it was after Dracula, so maybe the long reading on vampire lore was necessary.
I think it probably was at that time.
But it didn't tell me anything I didn't already know. Still, maybe the explanation was necessary at the time for audiences in 1932, but I thought it dragged the story down. There was just too much reading. It was like pages of material.
Mm-hmm. There was a lot, yeah.
There were a lot of interesting visuals here, but maybe too many. The story is really slow-paced, past the point of simply being boring at some points. We never actually see the vampire do anything, but there sure are a lot of ghosts roaming around. Yeah, I think it's worth seeing once, but it's all right. It's all right.
But you should see it once.
I'd rather watch. I think if I'm going to recommend one or the other, I'd go with Caligari, just because it was so influential and yeah, much earlier.
Yeah, I would too.
All right. Speaking of interesting things, we watched a short film this week called Chromophobia.
Chromophobia, Beware of the Blue.
From 2021, directed by Scott Coulter, written by Gavin Williams, stars Crystal Buckley, Sam Neill, and Ciaran Charles. Runtime 11:46, and there's a link in the show notes where you can go watch it on YouTube for free. And there's a definition I've got for you here. Chromophobia, also known as chromatophobia or crematophobia, is a persistent, irrational fear of or aversion to colors, and is usually a conditioned response. While actual clinical phobias to color are rare, colors can elicit hormonal responses and psychological reactions.
And in this case, there's a reason to be afraid of colors.
Yeah, it's not just chromophobia if the colors are really out to get you.
Yeah.
I'm blue. How about you?
Don't be blue.
All right. So two girls. What would you think?
Oh, it was nifty.
You like that one?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I like this
that
one too.
Yeah. Interesting idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, unique.
Two girls smear white goop on their faces and load up what sort of look like paintball guns. They cross off colors.
That's what they were.
Yeah, that's what we didn't know that in the beginning.
Yeah.
They cross off colors from a paint swatch sample, which it's like, have you seen me? Here's blue. Here's
well,
green.
some of them had
smiley faces.
Some of them had
yeah.
smiley faces, like they were okay. Yeah.
Well, we're shown that it is a post-apocalyptic world, and a building has a warning painted on it. Danger. Tinted. As we look closer, the paint on the walls seem to move. Are the colors literally alive? Well, the two march off into the ruins of the city, looking around for any danger. They enter a building. It's the only way through. A strange zombie with a bubbling head staggers in, but he doesn't see them right away. They shoot him repeatedly with white paintballs until he explodes. Will the duo survive the strange, colorful zombies? Tune in and find out.
So white is the anti-color.
Seems to be.
Yeah, in this case anyway. Yeah.
Well, the one girl shot him like 40
interesting.
times and it didn't
took
die.
a lot. That took a lot of shots.
And the other one shot him like once in the head and that did it. Why didn't you shoot for the head if they know that?
Yeah.
Maybe they don't know that.
Maybe they didn't know that.
Well, this looks really good and has a pretty unique twist on the zombie concept. Who knew that mixing paint colors would be the end of life as we know it? The color of your outfit just makes me want to die.
Yeah.
Well, it's far from a full story, but you can pretty much tell what life has been like to lead them to this point.
It's a slice of an apocalyptic world.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's a really creative idea, and it's got a very colorful idea behind it.
Yeah, it was good.
Check
it out.
good, yeah.
Check it out.
All right, now we move forward in time a little bit to Buffy the Vampire Slayer, 1992.
Prequel to the TV show.
Before the TV series, yeah. So if you've seen the TV series, you got to remember this came first. Because it's not as good as the TV series.
It's a start.
You can see where a lot of the ideas came from. And it was if this was the only Buffy thing that had ever been made, I'd probably like it more. But as it was, many of the same ideas were improved on for the series.
Yes, I thought so.
Directed by Fran Rebel Kazooie, written by Joss Whedon, stars Christy Swanson, Donald Sutherland, and Paul Rubens, and Rutger Hauer's in there too. Hour and 26 minutes. Link in the show notes to pick yourself up on if you have not seen it.
And Luke Perry in there.
Oh, yeah, he is.
Hilary Swank.
A lot of people before they were people. Yeah.
Before they were big. Yeah. David Arquette. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, a lot of mostly nobodies in 1992, I should imagine.
Not as big as they, yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think of the movie?
Oh, it was okay. TV series was better.
Who would if you're going to have to fight a vampire, would Paul Rubens be your first choice?
Yeah. He was something.
Yeah. What We Do in the Shadows TV series. Mm-hmm. You know, he's on the Vampire Council.
Yes.
He is one of the vampires.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a reason
with the same beard and makeup. It's the guy.
It's
the
that
same
guy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we get a history lesson from the Dark Ages about how slayers are chosen to kill vampires. We then fast forward to Buffy, a cheerleader who is said to be in the Light Ages. Credits roll. We see various characters as we zoom around the pep rally in the gym. You know, pep rallies on TV shows are always way more elaborate than the ones we had in our school.
And way more fun looking than the ones we had at our school.
Yeah, we used to go in, sit down, and listen to the band thump, bump, 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 and then that was pretty much it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. They always got these big shows and stuff in
they're way more
TV
exciting
pep
on
rallies.
television and movies. Yeah.
You'd think they had a bigger budget.
Yeah.
Well, Buffy and her friends go to the mall where they run into a trench coat guy who acts creepy. Well, haven't we all? That night, one of the jocks goes to the closed carnival alone. Later, he's reported as killed by a really gross hickey. That is seriously what they say on the news.
Gross.
We flash back to the Dark Ages again and watch the vampires Lothos and Emmeline kill the slayer of that time. Pike and Benny are the two drunk students. Emmeline, who's still around, that's Paul Rubens, he bites Benny while the trenchcoat guy rescues Pike. Buffy does acrobatic cheerleader stuff in the gym, and the trenchcoat guy introduces himself as Merrick. He's been searching everywhere for her to bring her her birthright. He wants her to come with him to the graveyard and learn how to stop the vampires. She doesn't fall for that line.
No. Creepy old man.
Hey, you want to be a vampire killer? Uh-huh.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, Merrick asks her about her dreams, and that does connect with her. She always dreams about fighting Lothos in the past. Rutger Hauer. They go to the graveyard and wait next to a grave of someone who died 3 days ago. Sure enough, the guy crawls out of the grave and Merrick attacks but gets beaten up. Buffy stakes 2 vampires that night, almost as if she was born to do it.
Mm-hmm. She's very good at it. Instinctual.
Yeah. Benny goes to visit Pike, and Benny has pointy ears and fangs now. Pike won't let him in. Let me in.
No,
you gotta let the right one in.
That.
The next day, Buffy doubts anything happened last night. Merrick throws a knife at her head, and she catches it in midair. Good thing she was paying attention.
Good thing.
Cue the training montage. Pike decides to leave town as it's getting pretty weird there now. Buffy starts patrolling the alleys in town and killing vampires. Merrick explains that they're both reborn repeatedly, and his job is to train slayers. Meanwhile, Pike runs into some vampires on the road. There's a running battle between him and Emmeline, who ends up losing an arm. Buffy intervenes and kills Emmeline's henchman. She takes Pike home with her and explains about vampires. Meanwhile, Lothos scolds Emmeline for losing an arm. I don't know how you made it through the Crusades, he says. Well, there's a basketball game, and one of the players is a vampire.
Gives him an advantage.
It does. Yeah. Buffy ends up chasing him on a motorcycle, and Pike follows alone a ways behind. They fight and beat a trio of vampires. Lothos and Emmeline are there, and she meets them both. Lothos takes Merrick's stake and kills him with it. No more Merrick. Buffy asks if her friends have noticed anything weird lately, and they're completely oblivious. Pike wants to fight vampires, but Buffy wants to quit. Benny overhears them arguing, and now the vampires know who the chosen one is. Lothos plans to appear at the big dance this Saturday to make his move.
The big prom.
Of course, he's been there since the Middle Ages, killing slayers and being a vampire villain and all that. And it's his big plan to go to the prom. Okay,
yeah.
The night of the dance arrives, and Buffy and Pike kiss, and then the vampires arrive. A bunch of vampires. But that's okay, because Pike brought steaks, and that's all right. She leads them away from the school, and Amelin attacks Buffy. She stakes Amelin in the best vampire death scene of all cinema.
Yeah, he did improvise that really well.
Yeah, and Lothos plays his violin for no particular reason.
Style.
Creepiness, yeah. They move back to the school gym, and Lothos breaks in with his sword. He does his villainous monologue, and then Buffy stabs him with a chair leg. Buffy and Pike dance afterwards. Later, they ride off on his motorcycle. A happy ending. Never to be seen with vampires again.
Until the TV series.
Yeah. Which is sort of a complete... The TV series is then kind of a reboot. It's kind of a continuation.
Yeah, like this was a different school before all that happened.
Yeah, she gets to the new school, and they're like, man, I hope that stuff doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
And yet they have to explain everything to the audience. It's a weird kind of reboot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the special effects here are purposely cheesy and silly, as are most of the jokes. Buffy? A Vampire Slayer? Yeah. That was all kind of original at the time. So we've all seen the TV series multiple times by now, and it's obvious where many of the series tropes came from. This film feels a little unoriginal coming backwards to the film like this, but it's important to remember which was first. This one is clearly aimed more at the comedy side of the story than the series was. The series was a little more dramatic. This was a product of the 80s, released in the early 90s, and it has not totally aged well.
But you should see it. If you like the series, you should see this.
A lot of the humor is based on pop culture and trends from those days, and it's pretty tame overall, but it's not really that funny today. Remember, you and I were around in the 80s. We remember the 80s and the 90s. I'll bet you put a teenager in front of this, they're going to think it's dumb.
Maybe.
Yeah, think so.
Yeah, I bet that would make a difference.
So, have you seen any werewolves lately?
Why, yes, I have, in The Beast Must Die.
Who was that werewolf?
Well, that's what you have to figure out as the watcher, as the viewer.
Yeah, this one's from 1974, called The Beast Must Die, and it was surprisingly good.
Yes.
Yeah, I thought.
Yeah, I thought so, too.
Directed by Paul Annette, written by Michael Winder, stars Calvin Lockhart, Peter Cushing, Marlene Clark, and a bunch of other people.
Yeah.
Who's it got in it?
Big names.
Dumbledore.
Charles Gray.
Blofeld,
yeah.
It's got some people in it.
Yeah, it does.
Hour and 33 minutes, link in the show notes if you haven't seen this one. It's old, but it's still good.
Yeah, I thought so.
The film opens with a statement. This film is a detective story in which you are the detective. The question is not, who is the murderer, but who is the werewolf? And then we get flyovers of a large country estate as credits roll. So they tell you right in the beginning that it's not so much a monster movie as it is a whodunit.
Mm-hmm.
You got to figure who the werewolf is. So you should be watching for clues. And we will spoil this later on, so yeah, I would recommend watching that first. A man runs through the forest being pursued by a man in a helicopter. Between the helicopter, soldiers on foot, and hidden cameras, they soon catch him.
They have to work for it, though.
Yeah, they do. He makes it hard. They let him go and give him a second chance and soon catch him again. Finally, he comes out of the woods and approaches a group of people having tea. The men behind him then shoot him in the back. They're all blanks. Turns out the man in the woods owns the house. He's Tom Newcliffe.
And all the people having tea are saying, WTF, Tom, what are you doing?
Sitting there at your party and your host comes out and gets shot in the back.
Yeah.
Well, he's really just wanting to test his new security system. This new computerized system can identify anything moving in the woods or in the house. Pavel, the security chief, asked what it's all for. Well, Tom is a big hunter, and he wants to hunt the biggest game of all.
A werewolf.
He and his wife have assembled a group of 5 guests with bad histories. Bennington is a failed diplomat. Jan is a musician. Mr. Foote is a cannibal artist. Davina is a killer housewife. And Dr. Lundgren is supposed to be a werewolf expert. Tom explains that one of them is a werewolf. Tom's goal is to find and hunt the beast. One of you is the werewolf. Us? No, I'm not a werewolf.
No, they all say.
Yeah, they all say that, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Jen steals a car and makes a run for it, but Tom pursues him. There's a car chase through the woods and dirt roads, but Jan soon gives up. I'll stay here if you let the others go. Jan says. Jan is the, who's the guy? He plays Dumbledore. Dumbledore, yes.
Oh, his real name? Michael Gambon.
Michael Gambon, yes. So, yeah, this was in the 70s, so he was young and had dark hair and stuff. But it's him. You can recognize him.
Yes.
If you're a Dumbledore fan, you'll like this. Well, before the night is over, I'll know who it is, he explains to Pavel. And Pavel is Anton Diffring, who was, I don't know, he's like half the Nazis in film, and he was in a couple of Mad Scientist films that we've done.
Lots of stuff.
Yeah, anything that involves an accent. Well, at dinner that night, he explains how lymph glands can create a werewolf. The disease that causes werewolfism is contagious through a bite. It is a disease, and eventually the werewolf will die from this disease. Silver is almost instantly deadly to someone infected with a disease, and they all pass around the silver candlestick. Everyone passes the test, though. Lundgren, Peter Cushing, explains that it wouldn't have worked anyway since wolfsbane must be present. We cut to see Tom in his greenhouse where there's clearly wolfsbane growing.
He just happens to be cultivating that.
Yeah, and someone throws an axe at Tom, but it misses. Night falls, and the full moon rises. Tom carries in his wolfbane plant to activate the wolf with pollen. Mr. Foot talks about aggro art, while Jan and Davina walk off into the woods and talk about Tom. Bennington comments that even the backs of Mr. Foot's hand are covered in hair. Yeah, he's got a beard, he's got long hair, he's kind of a hippie-looking guy from the 70s, and he's got hairy hands. Huh. That's not a red flag.
No, not at all.
Well, Lundgren points out that no one is showing any signs of changing yet, and Tom and Pavel note on camera that Mr. Foot does have very, very hairy hands. They just can't remember if he had those when he got there.
Did he always have hairy hands?
Night falls, and the guests go off to their rooms. An alarm signals that there's activity on the grounds. It's a large, four-legged animal of weight 159 pounds. Tom goes off with his gun, while Pavel watches and directs him through the cameras and sensors. A big, dog-like thing jumps past Tom and heads straight for the house. Tom says it's coming for Pavel. Pavel grabs a gun and gets back to his monitors. Of course, it jumps through the skylight and kills Pavel. They look to the right, they look to the left. Do they look up?
No.
They
do
never
they have
do.
silver bullets in their gun? No.
No. What?
Why wouldn't he? He's the head of security. He knows what they're looking for.
Yes.
Yeah, sit there with a regular gun.
Well, the thing jumped on his head through the skylight, so he might not have had time
Might
anyway.
not have, but yeah.
Tom heads to the security room, but it's wrecked and Pavel is dead. The guests all act what's up, and Mr. Foot is nowhere to be found. They find him in his room still asleep. Everyone is accounted for. The next morning, Tom sabotages everyone's car so they can't leave. Night falls again. Carolyn, Tom's wife, starts thinking he's lost his mind. She's not wrong. He's clearly obsessed. He shoots at the werewolf with a machine gun from his helicopter, but he doesn't hit it. The copter lands, and Tom goes in after it on foot. His own dog comes to help, but the werewolf eats it. And the helicopter pilot. Lundgren and Davida show up on the scene very shortly thereafter.
Suspiciously shortly after.
And they find Bennington's body, Charles Gray, Blofeld from
No longer
James
a suspect.
Bond. He's no longer a suspect because he's dead. I guess it wasn't him. Tonight, though, is the last night of the full moon. Foot makes a cross-country break for it, but learns that there's an electric fence. It's not going to be that easy to get away.
No, it's not.
Then the film stops, and we get a werewolf break.
And then there's like this brief recap of all the characters. And
Yeah, we get a summary of the
think it
characters and the suspects, and then we get a 30-second on-screen timer to give our answer. We then resume to a drawing room scene. Tom still thinks it's the hairy Mr. Foot. Lundgren suspects that someone could protect their hands with plastic varnish or something like that. Tom pulls out silver bullets and demands they each put one inside their mouth, because you can't varnish that. Foot tries one, and so does Davina. Lundgren wipes his off carefully before testing it, but doesn't do anything. Carolyn gets one, and we see that it was her all along.
No, not her.
Tom shoots her dead, but he doesn't take that very well. It's his own wife. Tom explains that she was with him in the barn last night when the werewolf was there. It couldn't have been her at the time, but it was. Carolyn had an open wound on her hand, and the bleeding dog may have contaminated her.
Yep.
She
She wasn't the werewolf.
They hear Davina scream and find Mr. Foot with his throat torn out.
No longer a suspect.
Tom's got one bullet left, and it can only have been Jan the musician. Tom follows the wolf out into the woods and shoots it. Tom then walks back home to find Davina and Dr. Lundgren there waiting for him. Tom's been bitten, and Lundgren notices it right away. He takes the rifle and goes inside to finish himself off. Boom! Well, there's a really hokey whodunit gimmick that really takes you out of the film toward the end.
I thought it did. Yeah.
Actually, remembering back to the 70s TV airings, this was likely my first exposure to a whodunit type style of story structure.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, people on TV always say, it's like a whodunit. I kept waiting for the break.
Whodunit.
The werewolf was played by a German shepherd, and it looks like a big German shepherd, not at all man-like. Still, this was a lot better than I remembered. Calvin Lockhart plays Tom as obsessed, borderline crazy, but not wrong in the end, and the 5 guests are all individual, memorable, and interesting.
Yeah, it was all pretty good.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, I'd recommend it.
Actually, of the 5, that's the one I would probably push the hardest.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to see one, go see The Beast Must Die.
Yeah.
So, are we going to have movies next week?
I bet we will.
I bet we will, too.
We're going to have a short called Blood Orange. We're going to do Ginger Snaps from 2000.
More
and
werewolves, huh?
Dog Soldier from 2002. Werewolves galore. The House That Dripped Blood from 1971. And The Babysitter from 2017.
The newer Babysitter, not the one from way back.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, that sounds like some fun movies.
Yes.
And we'll have a short for... Oh, we said which short even, called Blood Orange.
Blood Orange, yeah.
Look that one up on YouTube, and you can watch it before us now. All right, I'm Brian.
And I'm Kevin.
We'll see you next week.
See ya.